The pain hit me like a freight train, a crushing weight in my chest that stole my breath and sent me crumpling to the kitchen floor. I was alone. The house silent except for the hum of the fridge. My phone skittered across the tiles as I clawed for it, my vision blurring. I dialed 911, gasping my address to the operator, my voice barely a whisper. The paramedics arrived in a blur of sirens and urgency, their hands steady as they lifted me onto the stretcher. I remember the cold of the ambulance, the beep of monitors, the paramedic's voice telling me to stay with them. I thought of my kids Ellie and Mark and my sister, Claire. They'd come. I told myself. They'd be there when I woke up. They had to be. The hospital lights were blinding as they wheeled me into the ER. Doctors shouting orders. Needles piercing my skin. I clung to the thought of my family, their faces anchoring me as the world faded. When I came to, the room was quiet, the pain dulled by drugs. A nurse adjusted my her eyes kind but tired. I asked for my family. She hesitated, then said no one was there. I thought I'd misheard. No one. Not Ellie, my daughter who called me her hero. Not Mark, my son who swore he'd always have my back. Not even Claire, who'd promised after Mom died that we'd never let each other down. I lay there, the heart monitor's steady beep mocking my disbelief. Hours passed. I stared at the ceiling, waiting for the sound of their voices, their footsteps. Nothing. The nurse came back, her voice gentle. She'd called the numbers I gave her. Ellie said she was busy with work. Mark didn't pick up. Claire said she'd come later, but later never came. I was 55, a widower who'd spent decades building a life for them, sacrificing, saving, loving. And they left me here, alone, while my heart nearly gave out. The betrayal cut deeper than the pain in my chest. I thought of the trust fund, the millions I'd set aside for them. My life's work poured into their futures. I'd built it for their dreams: Ellie's art gallery, Mark's startup, Claire's endless charity projects. But as I lay there, abandoned, something shifted. The love I'd carried for them hardened into something else. Revenge. Not the loud, violent kind, but the quiet, deliberate kind that would make them feel the weight of their choices. I closed my eyes, the plan forming like a storm in my mind. I take it all away. Every penny. They'd learn what it meant to leave me behind. The doctor came in, explaining my condition: coronary artery disease. A stent placed. A long road to recovery. I nodded, barely listening, my thoughts consumed by the letter I'd write. The one that would change everything. I'd always been the dependable one, the father who fixed things, the brother who showed up. But no more. They'd made their choice, and now I'd make mine. Days later, I was discharged, weaker but alive. The hospital arranged a cab home. My house felt foreign, the silence heavier than before. I sat at my desk, the trust fund documents spread before me. I'd spent years consulting lawyers, ensuring the money was secure for them. Now, I called my attorney, Richard, a man who'd known me since I was a kid scraping by in Brooklyn. I told him what I wanted. He didn't argue, didn't question. He just listened, his voice steady as he promised to draft the changes. I hung up, staring at the family photo on my desk. Ellie's smile, Mark's cocky grin. Claire's warm eyes. I turned it face down. The pain in my chest wasn't just physical anymore. It was the ache of realizing the people I loved most didn't love me back. Not enough to show up. Not enough to care. I started writing the letter that night. My hand shaking but my resolve firm. I addressed it to them all. Each word a blade. I described the ER. The fear. The loneliness. I told them how I waited. How I believed in them until the truth became undeniable. They'd chosen themselves over me. And so, I was choosing myself now. The trust fund was gone. I'd redirected Ivory Cento, a charity for heart disease research. They'd get nothing. I sealed the letter, my heart pounding. Not with pain but with purpose. I wasn't just punishing them. I was reclaiming my worth. The next morning, I mailed it. No going back. I imagined their faces when they read its hock. Anger. Maybe regret. I didn't care. Or at least, I told myself I didn't. But deep down, part of me hoped they'd fight for me. Prove me wrong. Days turned into weeks. My phone stayed silent. No calls. No texts. No apologies. I went to cardiac rehab. Followed the doctor's orders. Ate better. Walked more. The physical pain eased. But the emotional weight grew. I started questioning myself. Had I been too harsh? Had I misunderstood? Then Ellie called. Her voice was sharp. Accusing. How could I do this to them? Didn't I know how busy she was? I listened. Waiting for something, anything resembling remorse. There was none. Just entitlement. I hung up. My hands trembling. Mark's call came next. His tone colder. Demanding I reverse the decision. I told him it was done. Claire didn't call. She sent an email. Formal and distant. Saying she was disappointed. Disappointed. The word burned. I didn't reply. The silence from them confirmed I'd made the right choice. But it didn't feel like victory. Felt like loss. I'd lost my family. Or maybe I'd never had them the way I thought. The house felt emptier. The memories tainted. I started volunteering at the hospital. Talking to patients who, like me, had no one. It wasn't much. But it gave me purpose. I wasn't ready to forgive. But I was starting to heal. Maybe not for them. But for me. The hospital became my refuge. A place where the sterile walls and steady beeps felt more familiar than my own home. Volunteering gave me something to hold on to. A way to fill the void left by my family's absence. I'd sit with patients. Mostly older ones. Their eyes clouded with fear or resignation. I'd listen to their stories. Hold their hands. Bring them water when the nurses were swamped. It wasn't heroic. Just human. But it reminded me I was still capable of caring. Even after what I'd done. The letter I'd sent haunted me. I'd see their faces in my dreams, Ellie's tears. Mark's clenched jaw. Claire's disappointed frown. I'd wake up sweating. My chest tight. Wondering if I'd gone too far. But then I'd remember the ER. The empty waiting room. The nurse's pitying glance. They hadn't come. They hadn't even called. I'd given them everything. And they'd given me nothing. The trust fund was my leverage. My way of saying I was worth more than their indifference. Still, doubt gnawed at me. What if they'd had reasons? What if I judged too quickly? I pushed the thoughts down, focusing on the hospital, on the people who needed me. One patient, an old man named Henry, changed things. He was 78, a widower like me, with no kids, no family. He'd had a stroke, and his speech was slow, but his mind was sharp. We'd talk for hours about his life, his regrets, his triumphs, the wife he'd lost to cancer. One day, he grabbed my hand, his grip surprisingly strong. He said I reminded him of himself, carrying a hurt he could see in my eyes. I didn't tell him about the letter or the trust fund, but I told him I'd lost my family too. He nodded, like he understood, and said something that stuck. You can't fix them, but you can fix you. I carried his words home, turning them over in my mind. Fixing me. What did that mean? Was it letting go of the anger, forgiving them? Or was it standing by my choice, refusing to let their betrayal define me? I didn't know. But I kept going back to the hospital, kept listening, kept helping. It was there I met Sarah, a social worker who ran the volunteer program. She was in her 40s, with a warm smile and a no-nonsense way of talking. She noticed how much time I spent with patients, how I'd stay late to read to them or just sit in silence. One evening, over coffee in the hospital cafeteria, she asked why I was there so often. I shrugged, said I liked helping. She raised an eyebrow, seeing through me. You're running from something, she said, not unkindly. I didn't answer, but her words hit hard. Was I running? From the guilt, the loneliness, the truth. That night, I went home and pulled out the trust fund documents again. Richard had sent the revised versions, confirming the money was now with the charity. Irreversible. I'd expected to feel triumphant, but I just felt hollow. I thought of Henry, of Sarah, of the patients who looked at me like I was their lifeline. They didn't know about the letter or the millions I'd redirected. They just knew I showed up. Maybe that was enough. But then Mark showed up at my door. It was a Saturday, the sky gray and heavy with rain. He looked older, his eyes shadowed, his usual confidence gone. He didn't ask to come in, just stood there, hands in his pockets. He said he'd read the letter. He said he was sorry, but it sounded rehearsed, like he was checking a box. I asked why he didn't come to the hospital. He mumbled something about work, a deadline, client. I waited for more, for something real, but he just asked if I'd reconsider the trust fund. I laughed, a bitter sound I didn't recognize. I told him the money was gone, that he'd have to figure it out like I did. He left without another word, the rain swallowing his footsteps. I stood in the doorway, watching him go, feeling the weight of my choice settle deeper. I'd wanted him to fight for me, to show he cared. He hadn't. Ellie's visit came a week later. She was different, angrier, tearful, her words sharp. She said I was cruel, that I'd punished them for being human. I asked why she didn't come, why she chose a meeting over her father's life. She said she thought I'd be fine, that I always were. Her words stung, but they also broke something open. She thought I'd be fine because I'd always been the strong one, the one who held it together after Mom died, who paid for their dreams, who never asked for anything. Maybe they didn't come because I taught them they didn't have to. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my desk. The letter's draft crumpled in my hand. I thought of Claire, who still hadn't faced me. I thought of the trust fund, the charity, the patience. I thought of Henry's words, "Fix you." I started writing again. Not to them, but to myself. A list of what I wanted, what I needed. Not revenge, not money, but meaning. I wasn't sure what that looked like, but I knew it wasn't in the anger I'd been carrying. The next day, I called Sarah. I asked if the hospital needed more volunteers. Maybe a program for families to learn how to show up for each other. She liked the idea, said she'd help me pitch it to the board. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a start. I went back to the hospital, sat with Henry, told him about the program. He smiled, said I was starting to fix myself. I hoped he was right. The rain kept falling, but it didn't feel as heavy anymore. I was still angry, still hurt, but I was moving. Not toward them, but toward something better. Something mine. The hospital program became my anchor, a fragile thread tying me to a purpose I hadn't known I needed. Sarah and I worked late nights, drafting proposals, meeting with hospital administrators who nodded politely but asked for budgets and metrics. I didn't care about the numbers. I cared about the people lying in those beds, waiting for someone who might never come. I saw myself in them, the version of me crumpled on the ER gurney, believing my family would show up. Sarah sensed it too, though she never pushed. She'd hand me coffee, make a dry joke about hospital food, and keep me focused. Her presence was steady, grounding, like she knew I was rebuilding something but didn't need to say it. The program, we decided, would train volunteers to support patients' families, teaching them how to navigate crises, how to be there without being asked. It was small, practical, but to me, felt like rewriting my story. I named it Stay, a word that carried more weight than I could explain. Weeks passed, and the hospital approved a pilot. I threw myself into it, training volunteers, sitting in on sessions, listening to families' stories. Some were like mind-fractured, full of unspoken grudges. Others were just overwhelmed, unsure how to balance love with life's demands. I didn't judge them. Couldn't. I was learning that showing up wasn't always instinct. Sometimes it was a skill, one I'd assumed my kids and Claire had but never taught them. The work filled my days, but the nights were harder. I'd sit in my quiet house, the trust fund documents still on my desk, a reminder of what I'd done. I hadn't heard from Claire since her email, and Ellie and Mark's visits had left me raw. I'd wanted their remorse, their apologies, but all I got was defensiveness, demands. I started wondering if I'd misread them entirely. Had they abandoned me? Or had I abandoned them first? In ways I couldn't see. The question kept me up, staring at the ceiling. My heart monitor long gone, but the ache still there. One evening, Sarah invited me to her place for dinner. It wasn't a date, just a break from the hospital's fluorescent hum. Her apartment was small, cluttered with books and photos of her kids, grown and moved away. We ate pasta, drank cheap wine, and talked about everything but the hospital. She told me about her divorce, how it taught her to let go of what she couldn't control. I told her about Mom's death. How I'd become the family's rock. Maybe too much so. I didn't mention the trust fund. But I told her about the ER. The letter. The silence. She listened. Her eyes steady. And when I finished, she said, "You're allowed to be angry, Daniel. But don't let it be all you are." Her words echoed Henry's, and I carried them home like a lifeline. The next day, Claire showed up. No call. No warning. Just her standing on my porch. Her coat dusted with snow. She looked older. Her eyes tired. Her usual warmth muted. I let her in. My heart caught between hope and dread. She didn't sit. Just stood in the living room, clutching her purse. She said she'd been wrong. That she should have come to the hospital. Her voice cracked. And for a moment, I saw the sister I'd grown up with. The one who'd shared secrets and dreams. But then she asked about the trust fund. Said it wasn't fair to punish them all. I felt the anger flare. Sharp and familiar. I asked why she didn't come. What was so important that she couldn't be there? She said it was complicated. That she'd been dealing with her own crises, her marriage. Her finances. I wanted to believe her. But the excuse felt thin. I told her the money was gone. That it wasn't about punishment but about protecting myself. She left crying. And I didn't stop her. The door closed. And the house felt colder. I went back to the hospital. Threw myself into the program. Stay was growing. With more volunteers signing up. More families learning how to show up. I met a woman named Maria, whose husband had a heart attack like mine. She hadn't left his side. But she was terrified. Unsure how to keep going. I sat with her. Told her she was enough just by being there. She cried. Thanked me. And I felt something shift. I wasn't just helping her. I was helping myself. The guilt over the trust fund didn't vanish. But it softened. Like a bruise fading. I started writing again. Not letters to my family but notes to myself. Things I wished I'd said. Things I wished I'd done differently. I wrote about Mom. How her death had made me the family's anchor. How I'd let it define me. I wrote about Ellie and Mark. How I'd given them everything but maybe not the tools to give back. I wrote about Claire. How I'd leaned on her without seeing her struggles. The words didn't fix anything. But they made the pain less jagged. One night, I found an old photo of us, Mom. Claire. Me. The kids laughing at a picnic. I didn't turn it over this time. I looked at it. Let the memories hurt. I wasn't ready to reach out. But I was starting to see them as more than their mistakes. Sarah noticed the change. She said I seemed lighter. Like I was carrying less. I told her about the photo. The writing. The program. She smiled. Said stay wasn't just for the patients, it was for me too. I laughed. The sound surprising me. It had been months since I'd laughed. The hospital was busier now. The program gaining traction. I met more families. Heard more stories. Saw more tears and triumphs. Each one chipped away at the wall I'd built. I didn't know if I'd ever forgive Ellie, Mark, or Claire. But I was starting to forgive myself. For assuming they'd show up. For thinking I could make them. For believing love was a debt they owed me. The snow kept falling. But I didn't feel as cold anymore. I was moving forward. One step at a time. Toward something I could build on my own. The program grew faster than I expected, pulling me deeper into a world where my pain felt useful. Stay wasn't just a name anymore. It was a promise I made to every patient I met, every family I coached. I'd sit with them, listen to their fears, their guilt, their small victories. I'd tell them it was okay to stumble, as long as they kept showing up. The hospital staff started calling me the Stay Guy, a nickname that made me smile, though it carried the weight of my own failures. I was teaching others what I hadn't taught my own family. Sarah became my partner in more than just work. Not romantically, neither of us was ready for that, but as a friend who saw me. Really saw me, in a way I hadn't been seen since Mom died. We'd spend evenings planning sessions, tweaking the program, sharing stories over takeout. She told me about her kids, how they'd drifted after her divorce, how she'd learned to love them from a distance. I told her about Ellie's art, Mark's ambition, Claire's endless projects. I admitted I'd raised them to need me, maybe too much, and when they didn't show up, felt like I'd failed. Sarah didn't judge. She just listened, her silence giving me room to breathe. The hospital wasn't my only refuge now. I started running again. Slow jogs through the park near my house. My heart stronger but still fragile. The cold air stung my lungs, but it reminded me I was alive. I'd pass families on those runs, parents pushing strollers, kids chasing dogs, and feel a pang for what I'd lost. But I didn't linger in it. I kept moving, one foot in front of the other, like I was outrunning the anger. The trust fund decision still hung over me, though. I checked my phone, hoping for a message from Ellie or Mark, something to bridge the gap. Nothing came. Claire sent one more email, brief, saying she needed time. I didn't reply, but I saved it, unsure why. Maybe I wasn't ready to let her go completely. One morning, I got a call from Richard, my attorney. The charity had received the trust fund money, and they wanted me to speak at their annual gala. They saw me as a hero, he said, a man who'd turned pain into purpose. I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like a father who'd burned his bridges. But I agreed, thinking it might help me understand what I'd done. The gala was in a downtown hotel, all chandeliers and polished floors. I wore a suit that felt too tight, my stent scar itching under my shirt. The crowd was kind, clapping when I took the stage, but I felt exposed, like they could see the letter, the betrayal, the revenge. I spoke about the ER, the loneliness, the program. I didn't mention my family, but they were there in every word, their absence a shadow. The audience stood, applauded, and I smiled. But inside, I was unraveling. I drove home in silence, the city lights blurring. I didn't want their praise. I wanted my kids. I wanted my sister. I wanted to know why they'd left me there. The next day, I went back to the hospital, back to Stay. A new patient, a woman named Linda, reminded me of Mom. She was tough, funny, fighting cancer with a stubbornness I admired. I sat with her during chemo, reading her favorite mysteries aloud. She asked about my family once, and I dodged, saying they were busy. She didn't push, but her eyes said she knew. One afternoon, she grabbed my hand and said, "Don't give up on them. They're still yours." I wanted to argue, to tell her they'd made their choice, But I just nodded. Her words stayed with me, like Henry's, like Sarah's, piling up until I couldn't ignore them. I started writing again. Not just notes but a new letter. Not to Ellie, Mark, or Claire, but to the version of me who'd written the first one. I apologized for letting anger win, for thinking revenge would heal me. I didn't tear up the trust fund papers, but I started imagining what forgiveness might look like. Not for them, but for me. The program kept growing, and so did I. I trained more volunteers, watched families learn to stay, saw tears turn into tentative smiles. Sarah and I got a grant to expand stay to other hospitals. And for the first time, I felt proud. Not of the money I'd given, but of the work I was doing. I ran longer, breathed easier, slept better. The house didn't feel as empty. I put the family photo back up. Not because I was ready to forgive, but because I was ready to remember. Then Ellie called. Not angry this time, but quiet, hesitant. She asked to meet, not to talk about the money, but to talk about us. I said yes, my heart racing, not with anger but with something closer to hope. We met at a coffee shop, the same one we'd gone to when she was a kid, when I'd buy her hot chocolate and she'd tell me about her dreams. She looked nervous, her hands wrapped around her mug. She said she was sorry, not just for the hospital but for taking me for granted. She said she'd been scared, overwhelmed, but that wasn't an excuse. I listened, waiting for the anger to flare, but it didn't. I saw her, really saw her, not as the daughter who'd failed me, but as a person who'd failed herself too. I didn't promise anything, didn't mention the trust fund, but I told her I was glad she came. She cried, and I didn't stop her. I didn't cry, but I felt the weight lift, just a little. Driving home, I thought of Linda, of Henry, of Sarah. I thought of stay, of the families learning what I hadn't. I wasn't whole, not yet, but I was closer. The snow had stopped, and the air felt warmer, like spring might come early. I didn't know what would happen with Ellie, or Mark, or Claire, but I knew I'd keep showing up. For them, for me, for the people who needed me to stay. Meeting Ellie changed something, like a crack in the dam I'd built around my heart. It wasn't forgiveness, not fully, but it was a start. I kept replaying her words, the way her voice trembled when she said she'd taken me for granted. I saw the guilt in her eyes, not just for the hospital but for years of leaning on me without giving back. I wanted to believe her, to trust that she meant it, but part of me still braced for disappointment. I went back to the hospital, to stay, to the routine that kept me grounded. Linda was weaker now, her chemo taking its toll, but she still smiled when I read to her. She'd tease me about my serious face, saying I looked like I was carrying the world. I told her about Ellie's visit, leaving out the trust fund but sharing the hope I felt. She nodded, said family was messy but worth fighting for. I wasn't sure I agreed, but her words stuck, like seeds planted in soil I wasn't ready to tend. Sarah noticed the change too. We were at the hospital late, reviewing volunteer schedules, when she asked how I was holding up. I told her about Ellie, about the coffee shop, about the crack in the dam. She smiled, said it sounded like I was starting to let go. Not of the hurt, but of the need to control it. I didn't know what she meant. Not really. But I trusted her. She had a way of seeing through my walls without making me feel exposed. The program was thriving, with volunteers in 3 hospitals now, and I was busier than ever. I'd lead training sessions, share my story, not the trust fund part, but the ER, the loneliness, the choice to keep going. People listened, nodded, some cried. I saw myself in them, in their regrets and their resolve. It made me think of Mark, of Claire, of what they might be carrying. I hadn't heard from Mark since his visit, and Claire's silence was louder than ever. I wondered if they were waiting for me to reach out, or if they'd written me off like I'd written off the trust fund. The thought stung, but I pushed it down, focusing on the work, on the patients, on the runs through the park that were getting longer, stronger. One evening, I got a letter, not an email, but a real letter, handwritten, from Claire. It was short, no excuses, just an apology. She said she'd been drowning in her own life, her marriage crumbling, her debts piling up, but she should have been there. She didn't ask about the money, didn't mention the trust fund. She just asked if we could talk. I read it 3 times. My hands steady but my chest tight. I didn't write back. Not yet. But I kept the letter on my desk, next to the family photo. I wasn't ready to call her, but I wasn't ready to throw it away either. The gala had put my name out there, and soon, I was getting calls from other charities, other hospitals, asking me to speak, to share Stay's story. I said yes to a few, nervous but willing. Each talk chipped away at the anger, replacing it with something quieter, something I couldn't name. I'd stand in front of strangers, telling them about the ER, about choosing to show up for others when no one showed up for me. I didn't feel like a hero, but I felt like I mattered. One night, after a talk, a woman approached me. She was older, her hair gray, her eyes kind. She said her son had been in the hospital, alone, and a Stay volunteer had sat with him. She thanked me, tears in her eyes, and I felt the crack in the dam widen. I drove home, thinking of Ellie, of Claire, of Mark. I thought of Mom, how she'd always said family was worth the mess. I wasn't sure I believed her anymore, but I wanted to. The next day, I called Ellie. Not to apologize, not to fix things, but to keep the crack open. We met again, this time at the park. She brought sketches, her art, said she'd been working on a series about regret. She showed me Oni man in a hospital bed, alone, his shadow stretching across the wall. It was me, or close enough. I didn't know what to say, so I just listened as she talked about her fears, her failures, her love for me. She didn't ask for the money, didn't mention it. She just wanted me to know she saw me now. I told her about Stay, about Linda, about the letter from Claire. She listened, her eyes soft, and when we parted, she hugged me. It was brief, tentative, but it was enough. I didn't hear from Mark, but I reached out anyway. A text, simple, asking how he was. He didn't reply, and I didn't push. I was learning to let go, not of them, but of the need for them to be what I wanted. Sarah and I kept building Stay. and the hospital became a second home. I'd sit with Linda, read to her, laugh at her jokes. She was fading, but her spirit wasn't. One day, she asked if I'd forgiven my family. I said I didn't know, but I was trying. She smiled, said trying was enough. That night, I wrote to Claire. Not a long letter, just enough to say I'd gotten hers, that I was open to talking. I didn't send it, but I kept it, folded next to hers. The runs in the park were easier now, my heart stronger, my steps surer. I passed the families, the strollers, the dogs, and feel less like I was missing something. I was building something stay, myself, a life that didn't depend on them. The trust fund was gone, but the weight of it was lifting. I wasn't sure what forgiveness looked like, but I was starting to see it wasn't about them. It was about me, about choosing to stay, not just for others but for myself. The air was warmer now, the snow gone, the park green with spring. I kept running, kept showing up, kept hoping. Not for them to change, but for me to keep going. One step at a time, toward something whole. Spring brought a lightness I hadn't felt in years, as if the world was thawing alongside me. Stay was no longer just a pilot. It was a lifeline for dozens of families, spreading to 5 hospitals now. I'd walk through the wards, seeing volunteers in their blue vests, sitting with patients, coaching relatives, bridging gaps I'd once thought unbridgeable. Each success felt like a stitch in the wound my family had left. I wasn't whole, but I was mending. Sarah and I were a team now, her pragmatism balancing my tendency to get lost in emotion. We'd argue over budgets, laugh over bad coffee, and plan the next steps for stay. She'd become my mirror, reflecting the parts of me I couldn't see: strength, stubbornness, hope. I told her about Ellie's second visit, about Claire's letter, about the text to Mark that went unanswered. She didn't offer solutions, just said I was doing the hard work of rebuilding. I wanted to believe her. Linda's condition worsened, and I spent more time with her, reading less, listening more. She'd talk about her life, her kids, her mistakes, the husband she'd lost young. She said she regretted the years she spent angry, wishing she'd chosen love instead. Her words hit close, making me think of the trust fund, the letter, the revenge I'd thought would free me. I told her I wasn't sure I could forgive. Not fully. She squeezed my hand, said forgiveness wasn't about them, but about letting myself live. I carried that with me, turning it over like a stone smoothed by a river. One afternoon, Claire called. Her voice was soft, nervous, not the confident sister I'd known. She asked to meet, said she didn't want to fight, just talk. I agreed, choosing a diner near my house, a neutral place. She was there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth, her hands folded tightly. She looked small, vulnerable, not the Claire who'd always had a plan. She apologized again. No excuses this time, just raw honesty. She said she'd been selfish, caught in her own chaos, and failed me when it mattered most. I listened, my heart caught between wanting to hold her and wanting to walk away. I asked why she hadn't come. What could have been more important than my life? She cried, said she'd been ashamed, afraid to face me in that hospital bed. It wasn't enough, but it was something. I told her about Stay, about the families learning what we hadn't. She listened, her eyes wet, and said she was proud of me. It was the first time I'd heard that from her in years. We didn't hug, didn't make promises, but we agreed to keep talking. It was a start. I went back to the hospital, told Sarah about it. She smiled, said I was braver than I thought. I didn't feel brave, just tired, but a good kind of tired, like I'd been carrying something heavy and was finally setting it down. Linda passed a week later. I was there, holding her hand, reading the last chapter of her favorite book. She smiled, whispered, "You'll be okay, Daniel." I cried, not just for her but for everything the ER. The letter, the family I'd lost and was maybe finding again. Her funeral was small, just a few friends and me. I spoke, told them about her strength, her wisdom, how she'd pushed me to keep going. It felt like a goodbye to more than just her, like I was letting go of the anger that had defined me. Ellie reached out again, asking to visit. She came to the house this time, bringing a canvas she'd painted a heart, cracked but glowing, surrounded by shadows. She said it was for me, for Stay, for what I was building. We talked for hours, about her art, her fears, the years we'd lost. She admitted she'd been selfish, assuming I'd always be there, unbreakable. I told her I wasn't unbreakable, that I'd needed her. She cried, said she'd try to be better. I believed her, not because I trusted her fully, but because I wanted to. Mark still hadn't responded, but I didn't push. I was learning to let them come to me, or not, on their own terms. Stay kept growing, and so did I. I spoke at another charity event, this time without the weight of guilt. I told the crowd about Linda, about the families we'd helped, about choosing to show up. They clapped, but it wasn't their approval I needed. It was mine. I started writing again, not letters or apologies, but a journal, a record of who I was becoming. I wrote about the ER, the trust fund, the program. I wrote about Ellie's painting, Claire's apology, Mark's silence. I wrote about Sarah, about Linda, about the patients who reminded me why I kept going. The journal wasn't for anyone else, just me, a way to make sense of the mess. One evening, Sarah invited me to a park concert, a small thing with local bands and food trucks. We sat on a blanket, listening to music, watching families dance in the grass. She asked if I'd ever thought about starting over, not with my family, but with myself. I said I was trying, that Stay was part of it. She nodded, said she saw it, saw me changing. I looked at her, at the park, at the life I was building, and felt something like peace. It wasn't perfect, wasn't complete, but it was mine. The trust fund was gone, but its shadow was fading. I wasn't running from it anymore, wasn't running from them. I was running toward something, toward Ellie's tentative steps, Claire's fragile honesty, maybe even Mark's eventual return. I didn't know if we'd ever be a family again. Not like before. But I was okay with that. I was learning to stay, not just for them, but for me. The music played on, the park alive with light, and I let myself feel it. Let myself hope. Let myself live. The journal became my compass, a place to map the shifting terrain of my heart. I'd write in the mornings, before the hospital, before the world demanded my attention. I'd sit at my kitchen table, coffee cooling, and pour out the things I couldn't say aloud. Me fear that Ellie's apologies would fade, that Claire's talk would stay just talk, that Mark would never come back. But I also wrote about the good the family's stay had helped, the volunteers who'd become like family, the way Sarah's laugh made the hospital feel less heavy. I was finding my way, not to the father or brother I'd been, but to the man I was becoming. The program was now in 7 hospitals, with more calling. Sarah and I were stretched thin, training new coordinators, writing manuals, meeting with donors. It was exhausting, but it felt right, like I was building something that would outlast me. I'd see patients' families in the halls, some hesitant, some grateful, and I'd know we were making a difference. One familiar mother and son, reunited after years apart, thanked me with tears in their eyes. I thought of Ellie, of Claire, and felt a flicker of hope that maybe we could find our way too. Mark finally reached out, not with a text but a visit. He showed up unannounced, like Claire had, standing on my porch in the late spring light. He looked different, thinner, less sure of himself. He didn't mention the trust fund, didn't ask for anything. He just said he'd been thinking, that he'd messed up, that he didn't know how to fix it. I let him in, my heart guarded but open. Sriyong, system open. We sat on the couch, silent for a moment. I asked him why he didn't come to the hospital. His face tightened, and he said he'd been scared, not of me dying, but of facing me after everything. I wanted to be angry, but I saw the shame in his eyes, the same shame I'd seen in Ellie's. I told him it wasn't enough, that I'd needed him. He nodded, said he knew, said he was trying to be better. We talked, not long, but enough to feel like a beginning. He left with a promise to call, and I believed him, just a little. Claire and I met again, this time at her house. It was strange, being in her space, seeing the cracks in her perfect life, unopened bills on the counter, photos missing from the walls. She admitted her marriage was over, her finances a mess. She'd been too proud to tell me, too ashamed to show up at the hospital. I told her I'd been hurt, but I was here now. We cried, not together, but close, and it felt like a step toward something real. Sarah joined me at a stay training session, watching me lead with a quiet pride that made my chest ache. She said I was good at this, at giving people hope. I said it was because of her, because of Linda, because of the patients who'd shown me what it meant to stay. She hugged me, brief but warm, and I felt the crack in the dam widen again. The journal entries grew longer, more honest. I wrote about wanting my family back, not as they were, but as they could be. I wrote about the trust fund, how I didn't regret the charity but regretted the anger behind it. I wrote about Sarah, how she made me want to be better. One night, I showed her the journal, let her read a page. She didn't say much, just squeezed my hand. And it was enough. The hospital threw a celebration for Stay's first year, and I spoke, not about the ER, but about the future, about showing up. The crowd cheered, but I was looking at Sarah, at the volunteers, at the families. They were my family now. Not a replacement, but an addition. Ellie came to the event. Brought another Paintinga bridge. Half-built. Stretching across a river. She said it was us. Trying to reach each other. I hugged her. My first real hug in years. And we both cried. Mark texted later. Said he was proud of me. Asked to meet again. I said yes. Feeling lighter. Claire invited me to dinner. Just us. And we talked like we hadn't in decades about Mom. About mistakes. About starting over. I didn't promise forgiveness. But I promised to try. The journal filled up. Page after page of my truth. I wasn't angry anymore. Not really. I was healing. Not for them. But for me. Stay was my proof. My purpose. My way of saying I was more than my pain. Sarah saw it. Linda had seen it. And now I was starting to see it too. The spring turned to summer. The park runs became daily. My heart stronger than ever. I passed the families. The strollers. The dogs. And feel like I belonged. Not to them. But to the world they lived in. I was Daniel. The stay guy. The man who'd lost everything and found something better. I didn't know if my family would ever be whole. But I knew I was. And that was enough. For now. To keep going. To keep staying. To keep living.